we do have like unrealistic goals at that point in time. When you're so idealistic, you're like, oh yeah, so I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna have 50 trucks.
Good education is the ground for a successful life and the basis for a functioning society. New solutions for education are necessary, especially when most people are young, and the number of children that need to be schooled is rising every year due to population growth. My name is Antonia Lorenz, and this is the Foundality Africa podcast. In today's episode, I will talk to Penina Kimani, founder of the Kenyan education tech startup Sproutify Learning. We will hear about her story of becoming an entrepreneur and her learnings about starting and quitting her first startup when she was just 21 years old. We will also talk about innovation in the education space and what is important when seeking seed investment. Penina is also great in building structures and processes, and she will tell us all about how she built a well-structured tech company without even having a tech background. But enough of me. This is Penina and her company.
So I'm Penina Kimani, or better known as Penny by everyone else here. I co-founded a startup called Sproutify Learning. Sproutify is an edtech application that helps schools manage all of their administrative and learning functions.
Penina started her journey of entrepreneurship quite early. When she was just 21 years old, she started her first company. Here's how that went.
Oh, I tried.
Can you tell me about that?
Yes, Safi. So actually, I first wanted to do waste management. So I actually won a grant from my university for a waste management company. Then when I came back to Kenya, I realized that there's a lot of political issues when it comes to waste management in this country. And you need the right connections. Like you'd get your tire slashed if you take pure waste to the dump sites, because we were trying to recycle products, so it was just not pure waste going there. But people make a living off like the recyclable material they get from dump sites. So if your truck is just bringing pure waste, they don't want it there, because now they're losing an income.
Now here are the first steps she took and the learnings she gained from it.
I talked to a few people and tried to talk to people in government here to try and understand how that would work. I do have a network of individuals who owned businesses, and I actually collected their recyclable materials, so that's how I first started.
Okay.
And I had this mini sorting site. My parents have some land that was not being used, so I was like, guys, can I sort out my plastics here? And they were like, yeah, why not? Try it out. And then to learn that, I didn't have compliance in certain areas. I just didn't look at like the legal structures of some of these ventures. And then the politics behind that. Do you know so-and-so? Do you have to facilitate, you getting the contract and other odd things? So first, it's lovely to have dreams, but if you don't have a plan that you can execute, then they're just dreams. And I think at first it was like, oh, I'm just going to come back and I'm going to, change how Kenya manages waste, Big dreams, but then it's like, what's the reality on the ground? Like what's step one to incorporating company? What processes did I need to have in place in order to create a waste management system? So I think a lot of young people have big dreams, and it's lovely to be passionate about something. I still want to go back into waste management in the future, but also we have to be very cognizant of the fact that you have to have a plan.
Yeah.
And an executionable plan also. And so that's one of the hard lessons that I learned.
Failing itself, however, is not easy. When do you know if it's not worth continuing? Maybe you should just pivot to reach your goal. How do you make such a decision? Penina quit her first startup after about a year. As you will hear, she has some great guidelines on when and how to quit a company, and also a beautiful way in dealing with that failure personally.
When I just couldn't see how I was going to scale and become profitable, just based on now the cartels in the industry and trying to break through that. I just realized, okay, at this point, this is not a viable business. I remember one of the greatest lessons I ever heard was, if you're going to fail, fail quickly. Don't fail 10 years from now when you've invested all your time, your resources, your energy. It's also emotionally draining. I think first I'd say, like, you have to know what it is you're going into business for. So you can be passionate about waste management or education, whatever your purpose is, but you have to know how you're going to achieve that. And if you're not achieving that, you can have all the passion in the world, you can care as much as you want to, but then you're just not achieving what you're trying to achieve. And at that point in time, at that juncture, you should tell yourself, okay, this isn't working out. So I think a lot of people get into businesses and don't have any like metrics that they use to measure their progress. So if it was for waste management, how many businesses have I converted into looking at recyclable waste materials? Or if it's education, how many students have I supported? And if you don't see that number shifting, then you're doing something wrong. So before you start any business, like, come up with your KPIs. What metrics are you going to use to define how close you are to your objective? It's definitely not a hard line, because life, nothing works according to plan, but you should see attraction. There should be progress. It just can't be linear. It should be upward mobility.
But what about pivoting? Shouldn't you just try different solutions?
I think it would be based on what sort of resources do you have to keep trying things. If you have them, man, you're lucky, and keep trying until you figure it out, because there's no perfect formula for anything in life. If you don't have the luxury of money, time, and all these other resources, then maybe it's time to look at something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that a problem for you?
So I had the grant money, and then that was done, and that was done.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. I call everything lessons learned. I don't think about anything in terms of failure. I was like, oh, that was really fun. Like, sucked, but it was a fun experience. And I think that if you frame your thoughts positively, like, it impacts how you feel about it.
After Penina ended the startup, she worked as a teacher, which eventually inspired her to solve the problems she experienced herself. However, when she researched the space, she noticed many challenges she didn't even know about before.
Before this, I was actually teaching A-level economics and business studies. That's the last 2 years of high school. And a lot of the kids that we had weren't doing very well. And what I realized was that no one is stupid. If you're not doing well in school, then perhaps the way your instructor is giving you the information is not how you understand it. But that was only possible because I had very few students. And so that was my inspiration. I was like, I want to go out there. I want to make sure every student gets grade A's, goes to university. So when I was doing my market research and I went into all these schools, and they were like, oh, Penina, we have fundamental problems. I don't even know which kids are in school today to think about who deserves what type of learning strategy, you know? So how can we solve these fundamental problems first, and then we can get there and solve these other learning issues?
So what were the biggest challenges they observed in schools, and how is Sproutify solving them?
Fees and communication, biggest challenges for all schools across the sectors. So that's schools like schools in like the slums or really high-end schools, middle-class schools, all had the same problems. It was really interesting to find that out. I know one director, she told me, because her school's really far from where she works, so she barely goes in. And she had just found, so they fired the old principal, got a new one, and then all of a sudden their revenues increased by 40% because the old principal was actually stealing money because they didn't have any financial management tools for fees. So how can we solve our problem? So we created a way that schools can invoice the application. And so she, as a director, even without going to school, can see how much has been invoiced, how much has been received, how much balance they have, and who owes the school money, just from her desk or wherever she is, cloud-based solution. For communication, so some of my friends have actually told me this. So for instance, there's a holiday, And so my friends, she didn't read the school newsletter saying that there was a holiday the next day. So she dressed up her son and they went to school, and then there's no school.
Yeah.
And that's just because she's like, oh my God, I completely forgot just to look at, this piece of paper. Like, I wish there was a better mechanism for the school to communicate with me.
Yeah.
And then that's what we have as well.
When building a startup, it's important to start with one specific target market to serve exactly right. That is to gain experience, traction, and to build structures that can eventually scale. Penina discovered that the challenges they found applied to all schools in all sectors. So which target group was the most beneficial for Sproutify to serve first?
There's a total addressable market, which I would say would be all schools, just having proper systems in place to ensure that they're giving the students a quality education. But when you're starting any business, you can't just target everyone. That's not a viable business model. So we narrowed our target market down to who would be the initial people to pick up our product. So we outlined it as schools that were young schools because they're more amenable to new tech rather than schools that have been in existence for like 40 years. And they're like, no, we have systems and we're kind of doing okay. And then we also realized schools whose parents were paying more than $200 a term for tuition, then the cost implication isn't a factor to them at all. And we also realized schools whose directors were more involved in the school was an added advantage because they actually knew all the challenges the school was facing. And they are the decision makers for bringing in new technologies to schools.
So where is Sproutify now?
So we officially launched our app last year in May. Had lots of bugs. Anyone trying to start a tech company, just beware of the process of going through that. We officially started selling our application in July last year. And so right now we have about 30 schools on board who are using our application. In terms of scaling, we're selling like every day. We're trying to onboard sign up as many schools as we possibly can. But some of our limitations right now are the size of our team, and that's why we're trying to fund. We're fundraising so that we can expand not only throughout Kenya. I've talked to a lot of people actually in Uganda as well, and they're like, oh, please, we need this, we need these solutions as well. So throughout sub-Saharan Africa as well.
This was Penina's and Sproutify's story in the education space. But I wanted to know more about what opportunities and tips you had for solving an education-related problem. What do you have to consider in that space? How do you start? And what is the potential of tech solving education in Africa?
First, there are definitely different kinds of edtech startups. So we're on the management side, some people are on the content side, and you can be policed by the policies of your country. So one thing that we've seen about like people producing content here for education, they have to be approved by the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, which again becomes a really hard channel to get approved by. The education systems haven't changed over time. We're in the 21st century, but people are still learning the same way centuries later. So it's also not an industry that is likely to have a radical shift. But in terms of just building tech to help that in terms of infrastructure, in terms of management, communication, learnings, you have to understand how things are currently being done and then just shift it a little bit further and further. So first, figure out what part of the problem are you trying to solve. Then go and talk to those stakeholders. So if it's teachers, go and actually talk to teachers, like, why are you not motivated to work? And it's like, oh, I get paid $100 a month, so I'm just going to skip school most of the time. Listen. I think that's the greatest thing that you could ever learn as an entrepreneur is to listen. Listen to the people whose problem you're trying to solve.
I was really thrilled to get an overview about the problems in the education space, to gain some knowledge and inspiration where to start when tackling an education-related problem. So I asked Penina to break down the space for us and to give us some insight about existing opportunities. She also explains how tech can be a huge driver for change in education.
So there are a lot of factors that affect education. So of course, attendance being the first one, the quality of teachers and resources as well. So if you have one book where you go home and you learn, that's amazing. If you have one book between 10 students, then in a year, then they got a tenth of the knowledge that another student had with their own textbook. So those are some of the challenges that are being faced, and I think that technology can really provide a solution for these, especially with the advent of cheaper technologies coming into place. So for instance, now you can buy a smartphone for $30 and higher internet penetration, especially in like rural areas. So coupling those two together and people coming up with the right resources for schools in those areas, then I think that could help shift the education paradigm.
So what should be prioritized in the education space in Africa?
I think Africa has the fastest growing population, the youngest population as well, and I think that you'll start to see a lot of businesses spurring from the continent. I would hope that the education system fosters more innovation. So allowing students to try new things, allowing students to learn from different academic practices and put all those things together. That's what I would want to see, and I think that's what would be best for us as a continent.
Securing funds is a hassle for any startup. That's why next, we're going to talk about getting venture capital investments. Penina will share her story and what venture capital means for her startup. Sproutify is soon getting into their second round. Here's what Penina learned from the first round of angel investments.
There's an element of preparation, there's an element of luck, there's an element of just finding the right investor who understands what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. So when you're running a startup, you wear like 95,000 hats. You're head of sales, you're head of finance, you're head of operations, you're managing different teams, different people, different aspects of the business at any given point in time, every day. So how do you effectively manage your time? And then fundraising is a full-time job. So one, just identifying investors who are interested in your space. So for us would be investors interested in edtech or women or agnostic in Africa. So first, just finding out who is investing in these spaces, that's a lot of work, that research.
Yeah.
Then reaching out to all of them, sending them your decks and following up with everybody. So it's a lot of work.
We will later hear how exactly Penina documents and organizes this task efficiently. How did you finance that in the very beginning?
We got some angel investors in Kenya.
How did you convince those angel investors?
It's a local fund here called Inogen Ventures. Actually, my co-founder had reached out to one of the partners there asking for support, and that's it. So when you're looking for investors, especially at the early stage, you have to have someone invest who believes in you, because it's really hard. You have an idea, but execution is a whole other monster. So somebody who understands that they have to be patient with you and what it is that you're trying to achieve. Someone else who has the expertise in what you're doing to help you build and scale your company. So we were also very selective about them. So just making sure that, like I said, at that point in time, whatever skills you don't have, you have to find the people who will help you. And that goes the same for investors. Don't just take money from anybody. Take money that will help you get to the next milestone.
But what do you do if no one believes in you? Well, not so much, unfortunately. Penina tells us why this would have been a huge disadvantage for Sproutify. So what do you do if you don't get money?
Just keep pushing on. So we would just scale much slower. Yeah, that's all it would be. It would be a lot of people are actually entering into the education market, which is why we wanted to scale. right now, quite quickly, if possible, because it is very nascent. So there are 80,000 schools in Kenya, less than 10% have any management systems. But then every day you hear a competitor coming in. Oh, there's an app from South Africa coming in. There's an app from, actually 2 apps from South Africa, or just different, parts of the world coming into the market. So you want to be the first person to market, because the switching costs are pretty high for schools. So once parents have downloaded an app, they're not going to tell you, okay, next semester download a different app. Okay, guys, sorry, now, seriously, now, next semester this is the last app we're downloading. So they're not going to do that to their parents. So whoever gets into the market first will have an added advantage. Yeah.
Next up, listen and learn. In this part of the show, we ask the founders about practical advice in a topic they are most profound in. This time, building structures. Penina has no tech background. Still, she is building a tech company which is mainly focusing on building an application in the first place. She will tell us how she managed to build a tech team and product, and also how she's building structures and processes every day.
I have no technical background, so that was fun. Building a tech product. Get the right team on board. So we were lucky to have found our tech advisor. Her name is Leslie. She was head of product at AWS for Amazon, and then she currently has co-founded her actual own startup as well, called GoBeba. So she played a critical role in our product development, so helping us choose what language to code in, what sort of database structures we should have. So things that I wouldn't have known because I'm just not a techie. So as well, I'd say if you're building a tech product or whatever you're building, find people who have the expertise that you don't have, and always be brave enough to say actually I don't know this. Therefore I'm going to ask for help.
But how exactly is she managing the product development?
So I just asked a bunch of different people how they were managing product development. Obviously, Leslie worked for Amazon, so we use a lot of their tools for managing, but also just an easy way for me to also understand what's happening in terms of our product development. So we're a tech company and we use lots of different apps. So we have our development apps, we have our sales apps, we use Pipedrive to help us manage our sales process. We have our financial management applications. So, but however it is that you manage your processes, if it's based of tech, or if you're a pen and paper person, if you just like writing things on a whiteboard, whatever it is, whatever works for you. Just make sure you will have it documented, written down, and then you follow those processes.
However, developing processes is not easy, especially when you grew up in a place where strong hierarchies were the only structure you knew. Penina told us about experiences that made her understand what structures and processes actually mean, and she also shares what actions she takes every day to build them.
I've worked in institutions that did have structures in place. I remember my first internship at Deloitte. I walked in and I just got a bunch of booklets on this is how we do PowerPoint presentations. I was like, well, I need to read, this font 12 over here, and, this font 14 for the title. I was like, man, this is, okay, interesting. Just for me to create a one-pager, slide on a PowerPoint. Everything is so well documented. So that was already in my mind. So for people who don't, I would say, but this is just a personal preference, I just love apps, right? And there's a lot of things applications that will help you manage yourself and a lot of your daily tasks properly. So for instance, we use Asana. So literally I would just write Penina interview or Penina has to do this. So even if I had to go back and look at my records about what I was doing, it's already listed there. Then for every task that I've written up, I make sure that I have documentation for it. So for instance, if it's research potential investors for Sproutify. Then I'll create an Excel sheet that will help me track that information down. So, okay, so what do I need to remember? The investor's name, their contacts, what stage of communication are we at? So just create an Excel sheet for that as well. You have to remember when you're building a business, it should be able to run without you. So if I was not here tomorrow, could someone just pick up from where Sproutify is and run off with it? I think that we've documented all of that well enough that they could.
What I realized here is that Europe or other developed countries are literally running on Excel sheets. And Africa is literally running on calls and WhatsApp messages.
Exactly.
This I realized that, and I was like, hey.
Yeah, okay, that's very true. I know a lot of Africans who run really big businesses like it was like a tiny, shop down the road, right? Just no processes in place. I think it's a cultural thing, and we have very strong hierarchies in businesses, and so people still like to have a lot of control and do the task themselves. So I don't know why you're hiring people if you're still doing all the things yourself. But if you understand the need to have that information sort of decentralized, so even if it was a brick and mortar shop, how do I order inventory? Where am I ordering it from? If like my child had to take over my shop tomorrow, would they know how to run it? Is a question at hand. And most people run businesses and, like once they die, then the business dies with them.
And lastly, from Penina to young entrepreneurs, some final advice on how to build and sustain a business while staying sane at the same time.
1, mission and vision very clear with you and your co-founder or co-founding team so that you're all on the same page in terms of growth and development. 2, you have very clear processes, but also be willing to change them. Have everything documented, all your milestones documented, and understand the impact of every choice that you're making. So for instance, if we dropped our price, did we get more or less people? If we increased our price, to get more or less people. Just perspective, right? So make sure that they're well documented. So each time you're like, oh, we changed this because we learned this from the market. So that's very important. And then 3 is grit. There are so many days you might be like, man, this is really hard. There are definitely days I've written up like a CV cover letter and like I'm going to start applying for jobs, right? So you just have to have the grit. And then the last thing I would say is you have to have an outlet for your frustrations, for your disappointments. So I love dancing. I love dancing. So I'll dance by myself. I'll just go out, to the club and dance by myself and just have a great, grand old time releasing all of that energy.
That's it for this episode of the Foundality Africa podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, subscribe and don't miss out when we upload new ones. Please also share and leave a review if you want others to know about Foundality. If you want to know more about us, or if you want to leave us a message, visit foundality.com. Also, if you know an outstanding African entrepreneur who you think could be a great guest, please let us know. We do post small snippets, learnings, and inspirations from the podcast on social media. You can find us under the name Foundality. Episodes will be uploaded weekly. See you then.